Hello and welcome back again to That Tracks F1 podcast with me, your host Jodie. So, what did you think to your Zandvoort weekend, guys? Did you enjoy that? What did we think to the whole concept of a sprint race at Zandvoort? I know what I think, but I'll get to all of that and, of course, chat about all of the sessions and the main race. But a couple of things first before we get into all that good stuff. Firstly, I know I say it all the time, but please give us a like, a subscribe, a follow. Links to our socials are in the show notes. And if you give us a review on your podcast provider, check us out over on YouTube, give us some feedback on the socials, anything like that really, really helps me out, guys, and it does absolutely mean the world. Thank you. Secondly, after all those weeks in the summer break where there was very, very little going on, very little news, very little gossip, very little chat, it all then kind of happened all at once, didn't it? And as you've no doubt seen, Max Verstappen has re-signed for Red Bull. And as I predicted, I thought, if he wasn't taking a sabbatical, he was absolutely going to stay put. And he has indeed stayed put and is signed until 2030 with Red Bull. I mean, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? This is the team where it's a little bit like the chat we have, don't we, about Lando will probably never leave McLaren because he's like part of the furnishings now, their family. And I think Max is pretty much the same way with Red Bull. So I was not at all surprised to find that he was staying put. I was also not surprised, and I did call this. In fact, I was having a family conversation the night before this news broke, where one of my sons was disagreeing with me and said that they felt pretty sure that Sainz was going to move on elsewhere. And I said, no, I thought he would stay put. And he did. So that wasn't surprising. But the 30 million to stay, that really did surprise me. That's definitely, to me, quite a surprising amount. Obviously, it shows that James Vowles and the rest of the team have got a lot of faith in Carlos. And I did honestly think that Carlos would stay put. There's a lot of people out there saying that Carlos has been sold a dream and it's not come to fruition. But really, I think we're a little bit guilty of seeing how good the Williams were last year when we weren't expecting it and then expecting miracles this year. And it's really, it looks worse than it is in a lot of ways because we are comparing them to last year. But come what may, Carlos has made the choice to stay. Silly season has been very, very sensible this year. And apart from possibly Ocon maybe being swapped out for someone else, I really don't see an awful lot of movement in the driver market. And of course, coming into this weekend's racing, the big news was that Isaac Hadjar would not be taking part due to a wrist injury that he sustained while doing boxing in training. And that has led to Liam Lawson getting a second bite of the cherry in the Red Bull seat, and also means that Yuki Tsunoda will step up into the Racing Bull for this weekend. So I really did think that was going to be an interesting dynamic. There was a lot of talk about why they didn't put Zolov in the Red Bull seat, but he doesn't have enough super license points. And to be fair, I think all round this was probably the fairest and most sensible option that they've taken. And I wasn't really quite sure what to expect from Tsunoda. It's a massive ask. He's not driven this generation of cars. It's a sprint weekend, so he was basically getting thrown in at the deep end. Yes, he'll have done some work on the sim, but he's basically getting thrown in at the deep end, an hour's practice, and then straight into sprint quali. So I really wasn't sure how Yuki was going to cope with that. Had quite a bit of faith that Liam would be okay, that it's a very different Red Bull now to the one that he drove for before, and he's definitely shown that he's well ready for it this year. So yeah, I was pretty confident that Liam was going to cope, but I was a little bit doubtful about Tsunoda. But anyway, let's take a look at the weekend sessions. And the one practice session, well, there was a lot of offs really, wasn't there? Throughout the session, Lindblad had a bit of a wobble first thing. Verstappen locked up on his first timed lap. Piastri looked to be on an absolute flyer in free practice. It looked to be a lot more comfortable with the car. Unfortunately, had a little bit of problem with traffic in the form of Alonso. And with 42 minutes to go, Hamilton went fastest. Then we had a brief yellow because Sainz went into the gravel and dragged a load of gravel all over the track, and then ran wide a few laps later again. Lawson straight away looked really, really comfortable in the Red Bull. It was absolutely great to see. And in the other Red Bull, Max was complaining about the downshifts again, which is not something we've heard at all this year, is it? And he definitely had a bit of a lock-up with the rears. Turns 11 and 12 seemed to be the biggest problem. Alonso had a small off there around about 2/3 of the way through the session. Same with Hamilton. He was off at 11 with 20 minutes left to go. And then Verstappen was off at turn 13, complaining of oversteer. And then when they went out on the soft runs, Leclerc was putting in a good lap, which he actually ended up having to abandon to preserve his tyres. Norris seemed to be quickest on the soft runs. And again, it wasn't a particularly clean end to the session. Leclerc was through the gravel. And when the dust settled and the session was over, the top 5 were actually split by less than 0.3 of a second. And the top 5 were Antonelli went quickest, followed by Norris, Russell, Hamilton and Leclerc. And those 5, as I say, split by less than 0.3 of a second. And behind Leclerc was Piastri, then Hülkenberg, Gasly, Bortoleto and Lindblad. Interesting to note as well, Audi's looking very, very strong. 7th and 9th, and they actually did no soft tyre runs. They did their runs all on the medium tyres. So I quite noticed that. So then, of course, we had sprint quali. And in sprint quali 1, with 7.5 minutes left, Antonelli has a really big off at the end of his lap and goes into the gravel. A little bit later on, with around about 2 minutes left to go, Alonso locks up and goes off. But there was really not an awful lot to report in sprint quali 1. Everybody just went out, did their runs accordingly. And the 6 that we lost were Alonso in 22nd, Perez in 21st, Bortoleto in 20th, Stroll in 19th, Sainz in 18th, Behrman in 17th. And the thing that I did actually notice about sprint quali 1 was that Ocon and Albon both went through to sprint quali 2. Which was good to see. It's not very often that Alex has out-qualified Sainz this year, and it's not very often that Ocon has out-qualified Behrman, so that was a little bit of a turn-up for the books. So moving into sprint quali 2, Piastri, again, suffering with the back end sliding around a little bit on the car, had a bit of a slide at turn 9. Again, not a lot to report, but something that really irritated me, actually, was that the TV direction this weekend's been a little bit off. And we had a minute and a half of this session left to go, and there were still cars out there doing hot laps. And for some reason, we're looking at cars being put back into the garage in the pit lane. And it was very frustrating. And there was a lot of shouting at the TV going on in my house because they may not be the top 4 teams, but I still want to see these guys do these hot laps. There's not a lot I find that gripping about watching a car being reversed into a garage. So I was a little bit annoyed about that. But in sprint quali 2, we lost Albon, who finished 16th, Ocon 15th, Hülkenberg 14th, Colapinto 13th, Tsunoda 12th, and Lawson in 11th. Was a little bit gutted for Liam, actually, because I thought he was doing a fantastic job. So for him to just lose out in sprint quali 3 was a bit gutting, because he really was quite on the pace of Verstappen. I mean, he wasn't absolutely up there with Verstappen all weekend, but he did a very good job. And sprint quali 3 is always just a mad dash, isn't it? And with just 20 seconds left to go, Norris is comfortably sitting on pole, and then Russell comes along and just knocks him off pole, just pips him to the post. So the starting order for the sprint is Russell on pole, Norris second, Leclerc third, then Piastri, Antonelli down in 5th, Verstappen 6th, Hamilton, Gasly, Bortoleto and Lindblad. Little bit disappointed in the pace of the McLarens, to be honest, and a little bit annoyed to see that both Norris and Piastri in 2nd and 4th were on that dirty side of the track, which I knew was going to do them no favours whatsoever at the start of the sprint. Antonelli down in 5th. Obviously, he'd had a bit of an off, and on the team radio, it seemed to be that they could see no damage to the car, but he did say afterwards that there was a hole, and he managed to put a hole in the floor, and that was really affecting his performance, because we don't really expect to see Antonelli down in 5th. And as for the slight discrepancy between Gasly and Colapinto over the weekend, those upgrades that I talked about, those updates that Alpine were bringing, have only been applied to Gasly's car at the moment. So then we come to Saturday morning, and it is time for the sprint. Now, as you all know, I'm a fan of a sprint. I think sprints get a lot of unfair criticism. I quite like them. Always say it, more bang for your buck. Think it's great for the people who pay to go and watch the race live, to get a little bit. I just think it's a little bit better than watching a free practice session. However, apparently there was an absolute mess with the trains going to the circuit, and a lot of fans looked like they weren't going to make it there for the sprint. And I think a few missed it, and a few were through the door just in time, which, that's got to be a nightmare, hasn't it? Spend all that money and really look forward to going and seeing the F1 cars, and then getting stuck like that through no fault of your own. I'd have been livid. But in fairness, and I'm sure this would be of no comfort to anybody that did miss it, you didn't miss much. Because I do have to say, despite the fact that I'm normally pro-sprint, this was a snoozefest. I don't know who decided in what meeting. Hey, I know. let's have a sprint race at Zandvoort, but something's not connecting up between their ears, because I did have my doubts a little bit. And then I thought, well, no, it could turn out to be just one of those really, really good sprints, really, really unexpectedly. But there's no bloody overtaking at Zandvoort. The track is narrow. I mean, I love the Zandvoort track. There's so much good to say about it. The drivers love it. But it is a fact that there is about one place that you can overtake, and it's just very narrow. So a sprint really is a bit of an exercise in futility around the Zandvoort track. But I did have hope. I thought something will happen, something will go off, and there'll be plenty to talk about, because things happen in the sprint sometimes. For all I do say I like the sprint, this is a downside to the sprint in that drivers are more risk averse in the sprint, because you don't want to wreck your car before the afternoon's qualifying. You don't want to give your mechanics a huge job to do in trying to piece your car back together in the 3-hour window to get you back out for quali. So nobody is going to take big risks. And that is an understandable and fair criticism of the sprints, and I do see that, and I do acknowledge that. And I think, unfortunately, at Zandvoort, that was very, very much shown to be the case. When it came to the start, I thought both McLarens looked quite slow away, but they were obviously on the dirty side of the track. And Lando Norris was immediately under pressure from Leclerc in third, right from the first lap. And really, in those early stages, the only thing that happened was that Antonelli got past Piastri for fourth place on lap 4. At this point, Lando Norris was putting in fastest laps. Lap 6, 2 laps later, Hülkenberg retires, which is really, really sad because, as I said, the Audis look to be going really, really well this weekend. As of now, I've not managed to find out what caused that retirement, but retire he did. And then on lap 18, Carlos Sainz also retires. And the other thing that happens on lap 18 is, after much trying and much toing and froing, Charles Leclerc manages to overtake Lando Norris, and then Antonelli is looming on Lando, and I did actually think Antonelli was probably going to pinch that podium from Lando, but Lando did hold on to the end with some really, really good defensive driving, and so the sprint finished with Russell, who took the pole, converted it to the win, Leclerc in second, and Lando Norris third. But there's not really a lot else to say about the sprint, because not a lot happened, except for the predicted rain that was supposed to come for the sprints. Yes, the predicted rain, which then happened after the vast majority of them had got past the checkered flag. So that was really disappointing, because I do think that really, really would have spiced things up quite a bit. So after that rather underwhelming sprint, we moved on to main race quali. And in quali 1, again, Lando Norris showing early pace, but it's actually Piastri who comes out on top. And Piastri's looking really, really quick. He still looks like he's probably struggling a little bit with the rear end of that car. He's not the only one struggling. Hamilton has a lock-up at turn 1. But generally, everybody scrapes through, and Piastri manages to hold on to that first place. So the session finishes with Piastri topping the session, followed by Hamilton, Norris, Russell, Leclerc, Lindblad, Tsunoda, Gasly, and Bortoletto. And in that session, we lost Perez, who qualified 22nd, Bottas in 21st, Behrman in 20th, and if you listen to my preview, you'll know why I'm quite upset about that. But I'll touch on that in the review. Stroll in 19th, Alonso in 17th, and Sainz in 16th. Liam Lawson actually finished that session in 14th and was on the radio saying he didn't really know what happened there, and he wasn't quite happy with that. And the other notable was that Ocon was through to quali 2. And again, Behrman not, and Ocon was. Behrman not through, but Ocon through. Now, when we came out for quali 2, the early pace was really all Mercedes way. Russell and Antonelli setting that early pace. But with 7.5 minutes of the session to go, Norris took the top, and then Piastri took the top again. Bortoletto had a really good bit of pace after a bit of a struggle in quali 1, and there's not much between the Alpine boys in this session, Gasly and Colapinto. To say that Gasly has the upgrades, there was not a lot between them. So in the final runs on quali 2, Norris managed to hang on to that top spot. So it finished with Norris top, followed by Verstappen, who put in a much better performance in quali 2, Leclerc, Antonelli, Russell, Hamilton, Lawson, Bortoletto, and Lindblad. So in quali 2, we lost Alex Albon in 16th, Esteban Ocon 15th, Colapinto 14th, Hülkenberg 13th, Tsunoda 12th, and Gasly just got pipped and ended up going out in quali 2 in 11th place. So that brings us to quali 1, and after those first runs, Lando's fastest with Piastri second, so we're looking at McLaren 1-2. They then predicted rain in the last 5 minutes, so it was a gamble. Now, I must admit, I'm a little bit cynical now when they say, oh, there's rain coming for this session or for this race or just rain in general, because I just think, no, it's not. Because she just keeps telling us it's going to rain, and it's not going to rain. Then they showed you like a long-range view of the circuit, and you could see this band of rain out in the distance of the pit lane. And I kind of looked at where that rain looked to be, and I thought, with the best will in the world, that's not going to get here, really, until the dying seconds of this session. And my son was watching with me, and he said, it's going to rain in the last 5 minutes. I said, there is no way that rain is going to get here in the next couple of minutes. That's too far out. My son disagreed, but Mercedes sounded very, very convinced on the radio that we were going to get this rain in the last 5 minutes. So then it was a gamble. Do you send your drivers out? Do you keep them back to the last minute and hope that it doesn't rain? That could go very, very wrong if the rain does fall in the last minute or two. Do you send them out straight away because you think everybody else is going to come out straight away? It really, really was a case of what strategy do we play? And McLaren more or less got it bang on right, because they sent their drivers out straight away. With 5 minutes to go, the McLarens were out, and so was Russell. But it was advantage Norris because he had got out there first. Lando put in a really, really good time and managed to hold on to pole very, very nicely. So it finished with Norris on pole, Russell in second, Antonelli in third, and Piastri in fourth. I think Oscar was a little bit disappointed with that. I saw him speak in interviews afterwards. I think he thought they were on for the McLaren one too. I'm not going to lie. I think that would have been great. Not to take anything away from George or Kimi, but I think the pace of the Mercedes was just a little bit more. Not entirely sure how Lando's managed to beat Russell to pole, because Russell has looked strong all weekend, but good on him that he did. So yeah, Norris, Russell, Antonelli, Piastri, Hamilton and Leclerc. That was a little bit of a surprise to see the Ferraris floundering a little bit more down the order there. Then Verstappen, Lawson, Bortoletto and Lindblad. Verstappen is not having a good weekend. I think in my predictions, I predicted Verstappen to do reasonably well. Perhaps not poles or wins, but podiums. I expected Red Bull to bring a little more this weekend, and for Max to go out on at least a little bit of a high. As I say, probably not the win. Well, probably pretty definitely not the win, but a podium, I think, would have been nice. I think it would have been really, really good for his fans. It would have been a nice send-off for Zandvoort. So it was a little bit of a surprise to see him qualifying down in 7th. And of course, we did get that little bit of rain at the end, but it really didn't amount to anything very much. It didn't really affect the session. So then, on to race day. Gotta say, going into this, not expecting much, don't know about you. Kind of took my cue from the sprint, thought it might be a bit of a slow race, a little bit boring, a little bit processional. The downside to this amazing little track is, like I've said, there's not a lot of overtaking. It's a very narrow track, and it kind of can lead to a bit of a stinker boring Grand Prix, to be honest. I kind of thought that's maybe what we were going for, because there's just nothing much to really talk about in the sprint. It was very predictable. It really was an argument against my enthusiasm for the sprint, that is for sure. So, low expectations going into this race. And well, it delivered, didn't it? It delivered with bells on. Again, been some speculation over the weekend about whether or not we were going to get some rain. And I got so excited when I saw half an hour before the race was due to start, it rained. And it wasn't just a little bit of rain, it really, really hammered it down. I thought, are we going to keep this up? Is this going to be there for the start of the race? And no, it stopped before the start of the race. However, it did that really awkward thing where it was a little bit of a judgment call, wasn't it? Everybody was chatting about it on the grid and the commentary on the TV. Are they going to go out on intermediates? Are they going to go out on slicks? Nobody knew what anybody was going to do. And I must admit, about 5 to 10 minutes before the start of the race, I was thinking, yeah, I'm kind of agreeing with people here. This is looking like a slick situation. But Zandvoort's a funny little track in that parts of it can be bone dry, while other parts of it are still really quite wet. Pretty much think they're all going to go out on slicks, but it'd be interesting to see what tyres everybody is starting on. So when the lights went out, it was a really, really good start from Lando Norris. But the same could not be said for George Russell, who was sitting in second. Absolutely just did not get away. The car seemed to bog right down, and it had such a knock-on domino effect behind him. The first person I noticed affected by it was poor old Oscar Piastri, who just can't seem to get a break. And he had to take quite an evasive action to not run into the back of Russell. And again, we saw that domino effect down the pack. And just takes a little thing like that to happen. George not quite getting away quickly enough. And like I say, the domino effect further back in the pack was felt very much. We saw Verstappen go a little bit wide onto the grass. He kind of got forced out by, I think it was a Ferrari, I think it was Leclerc, who was just basically just trying to make room for Piastri, who had to jink out around George Russell. And we saw some really good wheel-to-wheel between Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen. I was really, really impressed with Liam, actually, because he raced respectfully against Max. He gave Max the respect he's due, but he didn't shy away either. He didn't back down. Now, I know Lawson can be a little bit aggressive, but this was quite measured, and I was quite impressed that he refused to be put on the back foot by Max. Max did get past him, of course, but yeah, that was really, really great to see that little bit of wheel-to-wheel racing between the two of them. But of course, despite the fact that most of the track was dry, that last corner remained very, very wet. And obviously, with that kind of rainfall, anywhere that's painted on the track is going to be like an ice rink. So the drivers know to avoid the painted bits of the track. But there we all were, watching what was going on at the front of the pack. My first indication that something was wrong was what looked like a plume of smoke in the background. And of course, this was Max and Bortoletto, but not Max and Bortoletto. It was two separate incidents when it all came to light. And Max had just clipped the paint on the edge of the track and it had spun him, and it was quite a nasty crash. I was quite worried for a second or two. I thought, is he actually quite hurt? Because didn't see a lot of movement from the car. Quite concerning as well to see that one of the wheels came off, that those wheel tethers didn't function quite as they should. But I know it's not a guarantee. It's not guaranteed that the wheel tethers will always hold. But I think it's been quite a while since I've seen a wheel come free in a crash. Thankfully, moving at a reasonably low speed. But I'm here to tell you now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're ever in the path of a tyre like that, or a wheel that comes off a race car, don't get in the way. Doesn't matter how slow it might look, or how much you think that you can stop it. Trust me, you can't. I had that drummed into me quite early on in my marshalling career, when somebody I marshalled with at Cadwell told me that his wife used to marshal with him, and she had, unthinkingly, because we're trained, we have this drummed into us, you don't try and stop a tyre, do not try and stop it. And there was a wheel that had come free from a race car, and it had slowed right down, and she decided that she would try and stop its path. And unfortunately, she did stop it, but it snapped the femur in her leg. And that little story always stayed with me, because he really drummed it into me. He said, no matter how slow it's moving, do not get in the way. So yeah, a little bit concerning to see that wheel came free. Thankfully, it didn't cause anybody any damage. So anyway, when we pieced it all together, we could see that the whole thing that looked like it had been two cars that came together actually wasn't, and that Gabby Bortoletto had managed to spin himself through 360 degrees all by himself, had absolutely nothing to do with Verstappen whatsoever, but he'd managed to catch it and keep going. Unfortunately for Max, his race was very much over, and as I say, my heart was in my mouth a little bit. I was quite worried. I don't know what it was. I mean, I've seen worse looking crashes, but there was something about the impact and the aftermath that caught my breath a bit, and I was like, oh my goodness, is he actually okay? So I was pleased to see he was okay. And I've got a lot to say about Max, both good and bad. You know that if you listen regularly to the podcast, that I think he's an immense talent, but I don't always like the way he goes racing. But the fact that he immediately owned up and apologised to the team, I had a lot of respect for that. I did feel upset for him because this was his last home race for the foreseeable future at Zandvoort, and there was an absolute huge crowd there to support him and wanted to see him race this one last time. And as you know, if you listen to my predictions, I predicted him to, I didn't think he'd get a win this weekend, but I did think he would get a podium. And I was fully behind that. I think that would have been a really nice send-off. So to see him go out on the first lap like that was just disappointing for everybody, really. You want Max up there, don't you? You want him running, and especially at his home race. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be. Well, of course, this brought out a red flag, because this was a nasty, nasty incident, and there was debris everywhere, and the car needed to be recovered. As I say with Bortoletto, he managed to catch it. Full 360, lots and lots of smoke. And if you haven't seen, well, I don't know how you might have missed it, but if you have not seen the onboard from Hulkenberg as he comes up behind Bortoletto as Bortoletto spins, and Hulkenberg is going into this cloud of smoke blind. He knows that Bortoletto was spun in front of him. He doesn't know where he is or where he's going to end up because he cannot see him through the smoke. And the reaction, that split second decision of which way to go, and then to just jink the car to the left, and he cleared Gabby's car by millimetres. And it really is, when you're watching it, it's a ooh moment. We rewound it and watched it a few times because it really, really was one hell of a save, and Hulkenberg should be very, very proud of himself. So once we got back to racing again, everybody was around to the grid and getting in their grid boxes. But unfortunately, this wasn't the case for poor Ollie Behrman, who had trouble with the power unit. And we said, everything's gone off, everything's died, I can't do a thing with it. So that meant then that it was another formation lap before we could get racing again, while we had to wait for Behrman's car to be recovered. Now, on the restart, Antonelli gets an absolutely fantastic start and actually gets in front of Lando Norris. And it was at this point that my family and I all looked at each other and went, well, that's it then. That's the rest of the race. Now we're just going to watch Kimi Antonelli streak away, take another win, and it'll be a bit processional because it's Zandvoort. How wrong we were. So following on from this, Piastri on lap 5 comes past Russell in an absolutely amazing overtake. I had to say that my heart was in my mouth a little bit. I'm like, I'm going to make this stick. But yeah, completely caught George Russell napping and went up the inside of him and was very, thank you very much. Absolutely great move, great overtake. Piastri's quite good at these, isn't he? He's very good at catching other drivers a little bit unawares with how quick he can be. And he spots opportunities when it comes to overtaking that others might either overlook or second guess themselves on. And I think that's a real strength of Oscar's. So then on lap 18, Russell pits and goes onto the hard tyres. And a lap later on 19, Piastri goes in to cover the undercut from Russell. He doesn't want Russell to get back out in front of him. Unfortunately, it was another McLaren slow pit stop. I was again gutted for Oscar because all that work he'd put in with his fantastic overtake on Russell was completely undone, because when he came back out of the pits, Russell was ahead of him. Not long after this, Antonelli and Norris both pit. Hamilton pits on lap 26 for hards. And then I was really pleased actually, because I did have a bit of a critique of some of the TV coverage this weekend, but I was pleased to see that they did actually cover, I think it's right about lap 27, this really, really good midfield battle between Gasly, Hülkenberg and Lindblad. There was some really, really good defensive driving, some really good wheel-to-wheel racing, and quite a few changes of places as well. And Hülkenberg, again, absolutely flying. This Gasly, Hülkenberg, Lindblad battle. In the end, Hülkenberg goes around the outside and takes the place from Gasly. And then Tsunoda does an absolutely storming overtake on Gasly on lap 29. Now, as I say, I've heard a lot of praise for Tsunoda over the weekend, and I was kind of like, wasn't bowled over by Yuki's performance. There was absolutely nothing wrong with what Yuki's done this weekend. I just wasn't as bowled over by it as a lot of people seem to be. But at that point, I had to say, well, I've got to give him his flowers on that one, because that was a ballsy move and he really made it stick. So, yeah, hats off to Tsunoda on that one. So then on lap 34, Leclerc and Piastri are involved in a little bit of a battle, and Leclerc manages to get past Piastri and take that 4th place. So Oscar's day is going from bad to worse. And then just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, then Hamilton gets past Piastri on lap 35. On lap 41, Antonelli comes in as Norris is all over the back of him. Russell then comes in behind Antonelli for the double start. Hamilton is tight behind Leclerc and trying to get past, and he asks the team to tell Leclerc to let him get past. So the team then decide to tell Leclerc to pit, and Leclerc decides, no, thank you very much, I'm going to stay out, which he does. And then he does pit a lap after that, and Hamilton is pretty furious. Obviously, he's not really got the full picture in the car. He doesn't know quite what has gone on, and he thinks it's a mistake on the part of the team and the strategy. And he had quite a lot to say about that. And I couldn't blame him, but I was aware that he probably didn't quite have the full picture. Then Piastri pits again on lap 45, and it's another slow stop. I don't know what was going on today. It was like first day back at school up and down that pit lane, because just about every team did one or more really, really slow pit stop. I really don't know what was going on. I've never really seen anything quite like it, to be honest. I mean, there's one or two teams that, nearly always have a slow pit stop. Yes, we're looking at you, McLaren. But it happens to the best of them at times. A wheel might not want to come off, or not, or the other one might not want to go on, or there's some other little issue. But it just seemed to be the same story up and down the pit lane today. One slow stop after another. And Norris also then pits from the lead on lap 47, and he gets a really slow stop. He then rejoins in 3rd place behind Hamilton and Antonelli. And by lap 51, Norris is about 1 second off the back of Antonelli, and they're all on different strategies. And at this point, I've kind of lost who's supposed to be doing what, to be quite honest. And by lap 51, we have Hamilton at the front. A second behind him is Antonelli, and a second behind Antonelli is Lando Norris. Obviously, Norris is looking to get past Antonelli to regain the lead of the race, because Hamilton's got to pit. So just at a point where Antonelli decides to try and get around Hamilton, Norris sees his chance and gets around Antonelli on the outside on the banking. and it was one heck of an overtake. Really, really impressive. And he then gets past Hamilton just before turn 11. So on lap 56, there's another virtual safety car because Ocon is stranded at turn 3 with mechanical failure. This then, obviously, people start pouring into the pits. Piastri goes into the pits again. Hamilton and Leclerc double stack. Antonelli goes in and goes onto softs. But again, another slow stop. It's right up and down the pit lane. All of these teams, slow stops today. And this slow pit stop for Antonelli means that pushes Russell back up to second place. And then Lando starts to question whether he should have stayed out. He's a little bit worried, but it's too late by this point and he's stuck with what he's got, but he's still fastest even on the used tyres. So at this point, you've got Lando leading, Russell in second, and Antonelli, after that slow pit stop, is now third. So when we get to lap 65, you've got the two Ferraris catching up with the two Mercedes, but the Mercedes are not catching up with Lando Norris. And then Russell is told by the team to invert cars. In other words, let Antonelli through. I wasn't quite sure how this was going to be received by George. I wasn't sure if he was going to fight that. And he did ask a few questions. He asked, is Kimi within a chance of catching up with Norris? And at first I wasn't sure that he was actually going to comply with team orders, but he actually does let him through. Antonelli goes through, but then says to Bono that he thinks there's something wrong with the car, there's something wrong with it aerodynamically. And again, Lando Norris still hasn't stopped for fresh tyres, and Antonelli has got fresh tyres, but he could not catch Norris at all. And then 2 laps from the end, on lap 70, we've got another virtual safety car for debris. And that's because Sainz and Albon have had to come in together. I don't know what's going on with Carlos Sainz at the minute. I mean, he did get a 10-second penalty for this because it was absolutely his fault. Absolutely his fault. I don't get it. I was really disappointed with the way he's conducted himself recently. I find it to be a little bit alarmingly out of character, and he's a little bit gone down in my estimation. And again here, I mean, yes, anybody can make a mistake, and this really was a WTF Sainz moment because Williams have got enough to deal with. They've got enough problems. Now, sure, they weren't in the points, and in the great scheme of things, it makes no difference with the points, but it's car damage, and it's not just the damage to the cars, it's the morale of the team, it's the work that everybody puts in, and I really don't know what's going on with Carlos there. To say that he's just re-signed with Williams and so was Albon, they're one of the teams that can afford for teammates to take each other out, the absolute least. So, yeah, I really don't know what's going on with Carlos, but he really needs to sort it out. So as we're on the last 2 laps of the race, once we're racing again, Leclerc nearly rear-ends Hamilton. That was quite a hairy moment at turn 7, and this is on the absolute final lap. But fortunately, no coming together between the Ferrari boys. And so, yes, Lando Norris takes another very decisive win. So that's back-to-back poles and back-to-back wins. Very, very impressive drive. And the final 10 in the finishing order was Norris the winner, Antonelli second, Russell third, Hamilton 4th, Leclerc 5th, Piastri 6th, Lawson a very respectable 7th, Hülkenberg 8th, that's back-to-back points for Hülkenberg, Fernando Alonso in 9th, just popping up in the points there in his little Aston Martin, completely going under everybody's radar. There's that much going on, nobody's noticed that he's just kind of worked his way up, quietly plied his trade all afternoon, and managed to get himself a lovely 2 points. Well done, Fernando. And then Gasly was there for that final point. So double points for Gasly this weekend. He's got a point in the sprint and he's got a point in the main race. So a very, very eventful race. And absolutely lots and lots to talk about there. I've taken a little bit of time to think about this whole George being asked to let Kimi through. My initial reaction was, don't do it, George. Don't do it. Don't you dare put yourself in the position to be the number 2 driver. Once you do this, the precedent is set, and that's your fate. Signed, sealed, and delivered. Don't do it. Absolutely don't. I so wanted George to turn around and say no. I saw Toto Wolff interviewed afterwards, and he was asked questions about why this happened. And Toto's argument was that the Ferraris were catching. The Ferraris were coming, and that George was holding Kimi up, and the longer that he held Kimi up, the easier it would be for those Ferraris to catch both of them, essentially. And that was the thinking behind it. So Toto's argument was that they were protecting best positions and that it was no reflection on who was in front, and if the roles were reversed, he would have asked Kimi to move out of George's way. I could hear the collective eye roll when he said that, because I know there are a lot of people out there who don't think that is the case, who don't think that he would ever ask Kimmy to move over for George. I wouldn't like to say. I'd be interested to see a very similar situation to see actually what would happen. I see what he's saying there to some degree, but for me, you might not agree with the whole papaya rules thing last year and having 2 number 1 drivers and everybody saying you can't have 2 number 1 drivers. Somebody's got to be number 1 eventually and the other person's got to back them up. I mean, Kimmy's got a quite decisive lead over George, but George is more than within a chance. Got to remember the next race in Monza, Kimmy is going to be taking a new power unit, and with that power unit comes a big fat 10-place grid penalty. So if George plays his cards right at Monza in a couple of weeks, that's such a potential for him to take a lot of points out of Kimmy. There's DNFs, there's crashes. We've seen today, look at Max. Anything can happen. That's one of the things we love about Formula One. So I don't think that George really should be waving the white flag, and nobody should be waving the white flag on George's behalf and going, well, your championship's over, so now you need to play second fiddle. I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that George should be putting up with it. I get that George is a team player, but it didn't sit right with me at all, and I would have so admired George if he'd have turned around and said, I'm not doing it. No, absolutely not. I also don't think that Toto's argument made a great deal of sense. I don't see that it made any difference to the idea of the Ferraris catching up with them both. And at the end of the day, even if that was the case, then surely Kimmy should have been asked to stay within a second of George so George could have the boost and stop either Ferrari getting past George so that they could have the 2-3 on the podium. I really do not see any logical reason, particularly, despite what Toto said, for the swap. I really don't. And to me, there was just so many better ways of handling that situation. I think somewhere within lay a bit of a compromise. I think the better way of dealing with it, for me, would have been to say, right, George, can you let Antonelli through? Let him go, because you've got no chance of catching Norris currently on the tyres and the strategy that you're on. Let Antonelli through, because he's got a chance to catch Norris. And if he doesn't catch Norris, he will give you the place back. We've seen this done before. We've seen it done lots of times in Formula One. And I don't think that there was any reason why that couldn't have been the case here. But that's not what they did. And I think George has set himself a very dangerous precedent. So I think it's going to be very difficult for him now to try and demand that equal status when he's already complied with a move worthy of a number 2 driver. But that's just how I see it. Like I say, I can see Toto's point to a degree that they didn't want both of the Mercedes falling back into the clutches of the Ferraris. But it still just didn't quite sit right with me. And I was a little bit shocked when I heard that. And I was even more shocked when George agreed to it. The only angle that I can think where this situation makes more sense, and I kind of see why Toto would not say this when asked, is it at the back of Toto's mind? Are Mercedes concerned about how much of a threat McLaren are, particularly with Lando? Are they thinking ahead to the championship, realising that Lando's on a really good, strong run, that McLaren are updating that car and the updates are working? Do they perceive Lando as enough of a threat to Kimi's championship that it was important for Lando to take as few points as possible out of Kimi in this race? And is that why they actually swapped? That's the only thing I can think, because we saw last year, didn't we, that Max came from a massive deficit of points and almost took the championship. So is it at the back of Toto's mind that Lando is such a threat that he's having to cover that off instead? So we'll have to see how that unfolds in the future. It's an interesting dynamic. I know there are an awful lot of people out there that feel that Toto very, very much favours Kimi, and I don't completely disagree. I don't completely disagree at all. And as I say, I think if that, for all Toto's protestations, I think if the swap had been the other way around, I have a strong feeling he would not have asked Kimi to move over for George. I really don't think so. But who knows? That's why he's a team principal, and I'm a podcaster, I guess, passing comment on his decisions. Yes, so generally, a bit of a mixed bag up and down the pit lane, really. Absolutely fantastic for Alonso in the Aston Martin, and an absolutely dire day for Lance Stroll, who disappeared at some point in the race. Nobody seemed to draw any attention to him. I've yet to find out what happened to him, why he retired the car, but definitely a tale of two halves in the Aston Martin garage. Cadillac, I'm going to come to when I talk about my predictions. Williams, we know, another tough day at the office, made even tougher by Carlos Sainz. Racing Bulls, not the best performance. I think it's the first race for quite a number of races that Lindblad hasn't finished in the points, and I think he would have done, but for the fact that he did incur a drive-through penalty, and rightly so, because he overtook under those yellow flags after Max's accident. And while I'm very, very sure that he wouldn't have done that on purpose, he does have to learn that that is not okay. He wasn't the only one that did it. Colapinto did it as well, and he got the same punishment. And I can't really defend either of them in any way, shape or form, because you need to be paying attention. You really, really need to be paying attention. Had that accident been worse, had Hulkenberg gone into the side of Bortoletto and those two were busy fighting and overtaking people, it could have been an absolute mess. So yeah, a little bit unfortunate for Lindblad there, but it was his own doing. Haas, just another Haas day, wasn't it? Just another Haas weekend. I've been keeping a bit of an eye on the Haas boys, and I will come to them in a little bit in a minute. Ocon definitely was having a better weekend until his car gave up in the race. But a very, very underwhelming weekend again for Haas. Audi, absolutely on fire this weekend. Both cars look great. Super, super fast. Some absolutely great driving by Nico this weekend. Gabby, some great driving. Yes, the spin was not brilliant, but my God, he recovered it and held it well. Alpine, we really, really need to get those upgrades on Franco's car as well, please, Alpine. Apparently that's coming in Monza. They seem to have, I've not seen these upgrades particularly fire Gasly up the order. He's still in the pack and fighting. He can take the fight to Racing Bulls again, whereas the last couple of races they've looked like Racing Bulls has had the upper hand. But Franco's really floundered this weekend because he's not had those upgrades, and there's a big discrepancy between where he's finished and where Gasly's finished. But again, probably also affected by the drive-through penalty that Colapinto got. Red Bull, well, what can we say about Max's crash that we haven't already said? Just a real shame, really. It would have been interesting to see if he could have fought his way through and up onto that podium. And I did think when there was rain at the start of the race, I thought, here we go, wet race, Zandvoort, Max, we're going to see something really, really special. So very disappointing for Red Bull there. But Lawson absolutely stepped up to the plate and did a fantastic job. So a bit of a mixed bag. Ferrari, I guess I'm a little bit disappointed with Ferrari. I did expect them to go better here than they did. I think they showed a lot of promise over the weekend, but somehow it just didn't quite come together. A couple of strategy calls that I'm not too sure of. A little bit of a breakdown in communication, which was a real shame because I have been commenting on what a cohesive team they'd become. So hopefully they'll bounce back, ready for Monza, because obviously Monza is a really, really big deal for Ferrari. McLaren, McLaren definitely seem to have got the upper hand when it comes to developing and improving this car with the Mercedes engine in it. They seem to have really got a handle on that now and are making good, steady, consistent progress every race weekend. We're still seeing the occasional dip, and it's definitely not coming together for Piastri the way it is for Lando. But I think Lando has just got a handle on driving these cars now. He just seems to have adapted his style of driving a little bit quicker than Oscar has. Seems like Oscar sometimes hooks it up and it's like, oh yeah, I've got this now. And then it gets away from him again. And Lando's pretty consistent, and my God, is he fast. So yeah, a great weekend for McLaren. But pit guys at McLaren, could we please sort the pit stops out? Because I know everybody had a bit of a shocker with pit stops this weekend, but with McLaren, it's just consistently bad. And then, of course, Mercedes. I think Mercedes will have gone away a little bit disappointed this weekend. Obviously, this is an energy-rich circuit, so it's not going to play to Mercedes' strengths particularly. We know their strength is the straight line speed, so it'll be interesting to see in Monza. But they definitely don't look anywhere near as unbeatable as they did at the start of the season. And that's good for us because it makes it more interesting. So, when it comes to predictions, let's see, how did I get on? In sprint quali, in 5th place, I predicted Leclerc, and it was Antonelli. In 4th, I predicted Hamilton, and it was Piastri. In 3rd, I predicted Norris, and it was Leclerc. In 2nd, I predicted Antonelli, and it was Norris. And in 1st, I predicted Verstappen, and it was Russell. So, absolutely shocking this week. Absolutely terrible. When it came to the sprint itself, in 5th, I predicted Russell, and it was Piastri. In 4th, I predicted Hamilton, and it was Antonelli. In 3rd, I predicted Verstappen, and it was Norris. In 2nd, I predicted Norris, and it was Leclerc. And I predicted Antonelli to win, and it was Russell. So when it came to the sprint, I'm very much afraid I was completely useless and didn't get a damn thing right. Qualifying for the main race. In 5th, I predicted Piastri and it was Hamilton. In 4th, I predicted Leclerc and it was Piastri. In 3rd, I predicted Hamilton and it was Antonelli. In 2nd, I predicted Antonelli and it was Russell. And I predicted Lando to take pole, which he did. So a bit of a saving grace there. The other 4 places, it was kind of, I got the right names in the wrong order, but I did at least get pole right with Norris. And when it comes to the race itself, in 5th, I predicted Leclerc, and it was Hamilton. Now, when it comes to the race, in 5th place, I predicted Leclerc, and it was indeed Leclerc. In 4th place, I predicted Verstappen, and it was Hamilton. In 3rd place, I predicted Piastri, and it was Russell. In 2nd place, I predicted Hamilton, and it was Antonelli. And taking the win, I predicted Lando Norris, and it was Lando Norris. So, apart from my 5th place for Leclerc, the only things I got right this weekend were my Norris pole and win. So, thank you, Lando. Now, oh my hit the mark. This was it was vibes, but also a kind of a logic in that last year when Behrman went a little bit off the boil, Zandvoort is where he kind of came back with a bit of a vengeance. So I was kind of basing it on that a little bit, due an upturn, but really just vibes and maybe a little bit of wishful thinking for our Ollie. And he had an absolute shocker of a weekend. It really couldn't have been much worse. So no, hit the mark, was miles wide of the mark. And it pains me to say that because it pains me to see Ollie struggling in that car. It's awful. And this weekend, just to make matters worse, Ocon really he had the measure of him. He out-qualified him in the sprint, he out-qualified him in the main race, and neither of them finished the main race, so it's difficult to say there, but I mean, great for Ocon. Ocon's needed to show what he's got against Behrman, but just shocking for Haas all round and doubly shocking for Behrman. So my hit the mark this is probably the worst hit the mark I've ever picked. Pull over and park. I said it was a bit of low-hanging fruit, but I did pick Cadillac. So the circuit won't suit them. Reliability is still an issue. And a little bit of dissension with a new team principal. They need time to get the team working cohesively again. But yeah, just more of the same with Cadillac, really. Retirements, back of the grid. So yeah, I can say, yes, I got me pull over and park, but it wasn't exactly the most out there pick, was it? But let's hope for Cadillac that there's a bit of an upturn soon, and it would be good before the season is out for Cadillac to get some points. Now, one of my favourite parts of a review show is when I get to batter somebody with a flattering ram. And this is where I pick somebody or something that stood out to me on the weekend as being amazing. Just basically amazing for one reason or another. And this week, I'm giving it to Nico Hülkenberg because not only was he completely on it this race and was just like somebody lit a fire under him, he was just off and driving the absolute wheels off that car. But that save at the beginning, that save when his instincts kicked in, and I mean no disrespect to Nico when I say this, but he is one of the more senior drivers on the grid. And we all know that with time and age comes even for people who are top athletes like F1 drivers are, microscopically slower reactions. That nanosecond calculation that he must have done to try and figure out which way he thought Gabby was going to appear through the smoke. That really, really was quite amazing and very, very skillful. And I absolutely have to give him his flowers, or in this case, I have to beat him on the head with the flattering ram. So well done, Nico Hülkenberg. Not only was that an incredible save, but you then went on to have a really, really good, solid race result. And that brings to an end my review of the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. I actually felt quite sad today, and because I think I'll really miss this circuit. I do really like Zandvoort. I know it doesn't always give us quite such an exciting race as we got today, and I'm glad it was an exciting race as the final race. Just a shame for Max, obviously, being his home race. But yeah, I was a little bit sad that we won't be going back to Zandvoort, even on a rotation, because I do still think that, for me, nowhere else quite looks like it. And sometimes I think, especially now we've got quite a lot of street circuits, some of them can look a little bit samey. And Zandvoort is quite unique. As soon as you see the beach and the flags, because it's always bloody windy there, because it basically is just right on the shoreline, and that banking and the undulating circuit, yeah, it's kind of an iconic little track for me. So I am sad to see it go, but it really did go out with a bang. Of course, next is Monza in 2 weeks. I do love Monza. I have been lucky enough to go to Monza many, many years ago, and I can tell you now that the atmosphere is like nowhere else. The year I went, this will tell you how long ago it was Schumacher in the Ferrari that won. And I was stood right under the podium when all three of them came out onto the podium. And it was an experience I'll never forget. I have to hold my hands up and say that despite the fact that I admired his talent, I was never particularly a fan of Schumacher, but to be at Monza when Ferrari win is a feeling like absolutely no other. It was really, really incredible. Great little circuit. Absolutely love it. Looking forward to that. So I'll be back on the Thursday before that race weekend to give you my preview of the Monza Grand Prix. In the meantime, take care, look after yourself, be kind to yourself, and don't forget the cheesy tagline. That Tracks F1 podcast. Track the action. Join the fun. Bye.